Hey everybody, this is Perch. I recently got a chance to catch up with Jim Zub, who, as you know, has been on the show a few times, and always great to talk to Jim. I find that you know Jim is he's nice to talk to because first of all, wealth of information, everything else, but also you feel this overwhelming enthusiasm and positivity for the books he's writing, and it sounds very. That sounds like a very thin compliment. But in the world of comics, where a lot of the marketing feels forced, it feels like people sometimes are doing it with a gun to their head or just very half-assed. Like we did the least possible effort to promote this book. ChatGPT has written this entire thing, and we're not even going to pretend. We're going to go ahead and not even have a human read it. We're just going to have voice, the metallic robot voice explain this solicit. Or just downright kind of anger. It's surprising to me sometimes how comic, and this is one of the things I dislike about comic quote unquote community or kind of the people within it is it's like everything is perfect. Comics are wonderful. A person I don't like was just put on a comic. Comics are falling apart. The apocalypse is coming, and I'm not talking, by the way, from the fans. I'm talking by the creators. It was striking to me during the what was it the series that he's doing Rorschach, when Tom King was doing that series, and it was there's too much negativity in comics. People shouldn't be negative in comics. I hate all these haters in comics, and you guys are slobs and incels and everything else. They did a cover with Jay Lee. Fuck that guy. Fuck Jay Lee. And it's just you can't have both, right? You can have one, you can have the other, but you cannot have like screw the haters. Everything is amazing. Here's somebody I don't like. That guy can go to hell. It's just, it's you either have to love it or don't. And I think it's been a contradiction. And I've talked to other people about this, or other people have talked to me about this. It's like, we don't like Perch's rules. If I say something nice about a comic, if I say, the worst for me is always when I say I'm trying to understand something about why the comic business works this way. I'm trying to understand, how could it be that this is going on? How could it be that this is the behavior or whatever? How can this be? And people will be like, why is Perch trying to find out the answer? The answer is woke. Fuck Perch for trying to find out. He's an industry shill. And it's just like, you're not curious. You don't want to get to the bottom of things. Anyway, there's a lot I can go on and on. But I set up that intro. So back to Zub. Zub, what I appreciate about him is when he talks about his comics and what he's doing, it doesn't feel like it's written from a robot, and it also feels like he's genuinely enjoying it. He's genuinely passionate about what he's talking about, and that enthusiasm sticks. Other people have talked about that. I've chatted with other people about it, and it's like even if you're not terribly interested in the characters of that he's writing, you still want to read those books. You're excited about that. You get like I personally, that's what I took away from when Sean Murphy was promoting Zorro, and he's like, here's somebody who loves Zorro, and he was very excited to do that. I did not take away, he's trying to culturally appropriate my heritage. Okay. I didn't get that. I didn't get the, he put a woman and made her gay in the comic. And then, I always wonder, like, months later, when you actually read the comic, you're like, oh, I see. It wasn't what I was screaming about for hours. After all, it wasn't the stuff that I was trying to commit. Like, do you lose face? Do people ever look at you and go, "Hey, this guy was full of shit"? I'm just curious. Did any of you circle back on that one? Because there have been several of those where it's like, this is the way it is, and it's like, nope, wasn't that way at all. It's like, Anyway, I would think people would lose credibility, but maybe. Maybe Zach is right. It's just about the rage, and fuck the truth. Anyway, this mail kind of references Conan, which is why I had that lead in and thought, positivity is a nice thing. So it says, "Hey Perch, with the success of Jim Zub's Conan for Titan books, I'm curious why we don't see more sword and sorcery type stories. It feels like fantasy would do well, and comic publishers often repeat anything that makes even a little bit of money. So why are we not seeing a lot of fantasy books flood the shelves? At a time when Marvel has announced vampire events and DC has announced vampire events, why are we still going in on vampires when it feels like sword and sorcery and fantasy is where it's at? Conan being popular after Marvel crashed and burned with it shows that if you get the right writer on and you get the right excitement for the book, that get the right excitement for the book, that genre can do very, very well. So why not an ongoing Dungeons and Dragons comic? Why not an ongoing Magic the Gathering comic? Why not comics based on fantasy properties, which everybody knows and loves? It feels like there's a lot of material there and money just waiting to be made. What do you think? What I think is that almost any genre, if you put a good writer, you have a good direction, you have a good character, and you have it all kind of aimed out, I think it will do real well. Honestly, I think that I think that there's a huge opportunity for that stuff to be successful. I think you could do it with horror. I think you could do it with westerns. I think you could do it with sci-fi. I think you could do it with fantasy. But there is the trick to it. You can call it a trick. Is that the story has to be solid and it can't just rely on its background property. And it helps if you have kind of a lore and a mythology to it. So if you look at something like Conan, the Robert E. Howard stuff, Zub is tapping into, what is decades of history and background information about the character. He's not starting from zero. He's got a lot that he's able to feed into. And then he layers on top of that, relatively, I'm not saying simple in a bad word, but, easy to follow stories, something where, Conan is a mission. He's not getting into maybe Conan, maybe it's the multiverse and Conan has to go fight the other Conans in the other multiverses. And here's a Conan who's a dentist, and here's another one who's part cyborg, and here's one that's part symbiote. And I mean, he's not doing that story. He's doing a story that's rooted in Conan. It would make sense if, the books were continuing or the movies were continuing. You'd pick up this comic and you're like, yeah, this is still Conan. You can recognize yourself in it. And I think that's the plus, and that's why, frankly, I think the book is doing well, is because it's something, it knows its audience, it's reaching out to its audience, it's putting a book out that's familiar to that audience, and it's not trying to subvert expectations, doing some crazy shit, and so it works. And I think if you were to do that with, say, Dungeons and Dragons, you would need to make sure the story was really good. You need to lean on some of the background of the lore. But you need to make sure you have a kind of fun, engaging book or, engaging comic that fits that audience. And I wouldn't get too cute with the nostalgia. You have to find the right balance. The Dungeons and Dragons movie, the recent one that came out, was the Chris Pine one, was great. It was entertaining. It was fun. It kind of moved from point A to point B. And I mean, you appreciated the journey. It definitely had comedy. It was fun and funny at times, but it wasn't overly Marvel quippy. And it did reference, I mean, you had this very, very brief cameo in the Coliseum of the cartoon. The characters are there in the same costumes. You had, you had characters and situations that were lightly familiar to Dungeons and Dragons players. It's a gelatinous cube. And I mean, you had stuff like that, but it wasn't over your head. It didn't feel like when you're watching that movie, if you'd never played Dungeons and Dragons, you didn't feel like you were, like somehow missing out or that the story was leaving you behind. It just worked. It also didn't feel like it was banging you over the head to go buy Dungeons and Dragons. It felt authentic to itself. I think with, what people have to get into if they're going to, explore some of these properties is they need to get into the spirit of what it's all about. And for a game, that's tougher, I think, because like with Conan, you have lots and lots of books of source material. With a game, you have rules and a handbook and structure that, you, a player, can go off and do whatever you want with it. Same thing with Magic the Gathering. I mean, you got stuff in there that shouldn't be translated into a comic in terms of the structure of the game. So you need to kind of dive into the environment and probably be a little cautious of, you have to have somebody who respects the source material, but not somebody who is bound by it. Not somebody who's feels like they're, so engulfed that they have to make it feel authentic every moment to the game and sacrifice story quality or fun in the process. And I think that's what would happen. But should it be done? Sure. I mean, look, I think you put some high quality people on Dungeons and Dragons and go to town. I think you could do really well. I also think that if you're going to do that, the best thing you could do is like get an art team and get a creative team like what they have on Conan, and make it feel like that kind of project. Don't put a modern comic artist, or you know what, that's not the right way to say it, but don't put Greg Capullo, for example. It might look cool, but don't put Greg Capullo on something like Dungeons and Dragons. Make it, go for the Frank Frazetta like art. Go for something that's really steeped in fantasy, and get a writer who understands that and is going to write in that tone, and isn't going to try and put in singers throughout the thing. Again, the humor in Dungeons and Dragons was good. It fit, but it was right on the edge. I think they like 5 more jokes, and it would have tipped into being silly. You would have lost the stakes. I think it worked because you had a threat that actually visually was threatening and could do impressive things, and so that all functioned. And it was still, I mean, it was definitely a comedy as much as action. And if anything, I would say I wish I would nudge a little bit more in the action. But it's like with comedy, be careful. If you're not really good at it, it's more eye rolling and groan inducing than positive. But they should definitely do it. We should see a Dungeons and Dragons stuff. I mean, the success of Conan should be something that comic companies pay attention to, and they should learn a few things. One, you could go to a different genre and you can make it work. You can respect an authentic property and do it, in the tone of how it was in the 70s. And I say this as a high compliment. And it can work. You don't need to update it for modern audiences. You can just have it be good. You don't need to worry about any of that stuff if the story is solid. And then, most of all, get people who actually want to write fantasy, and don't hire Kelly Thompson to come in and do your Dungeons and Dragons story. Hire somebody who's just, really, a solid long form storyteller, and that's what you do. And every impulse you have to to inject, I don't want to make it about this, but it's like you don't sit down and go, okay, we need a team in here, and we need to have one woman, and we need to have one, white man, we need to have one black man, we need to have one Hispanic. Don't make a bingo card checklist. There's plenty of stories and comics that do diversity quite well, and it doesn't feel like they're trying to, they map the checklist out. They just tell, a story, and it just works. They're like, let's create an engaging character. Not, all right, now we're going to have to make sure there's at least 3 women on this team because we're going to have 7 people, and if we need to have at least close, if not more than 50% women on this team, and, we need to at least make one of those women, their backstory is going to be that they were not respected in their village because they had strength, and then but the men, and they could do stuff, but the men wouldn't let them do stuff, and so they got angry, and then when they got angry, they kind of became an outcast, and it's like, fuck's sake, just focus on something that is going to be really steeped in the lore, and the rest will take care of itself. And I think you'll find that it appeals to lots of audiences of all races, genders, colors, etc., just by nature of it being good. I think that's what you should do, and I think people should try it. Fantasy's there. Be worth doing. Anyway, what do you think? Would you buy a fantasy book? Not necessarily Dungeons and Dragons and Magic, and I'm not sure those brands are as well loved in 2024 as people think, but I mean, maybe. I don't know. What is the state of Magic the Gathering these days? Last I heard, people were upset with WotC for what they were doing, so I don't know. But would you buy a comic like that? Are you buying Conan? Do you enjoy it, and why? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for listening.